I would like to call to order the Norristown Council meeting for December 3rd of 2019. If we could all please stand for a moment of silence for Mr. Delbert Harris, who was a pillar in the community. He came to several council meetings in terms of recreation and the parks, so he will be sadly missed on the behalf of council. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, may I please have roll call?
Olivia Brady, Valerie Scott Cooper, Akeem Jones, Derek Perry, Rebecca Smith, Heather Lewis, Sonia Sanders.
Here. Would a member of council like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from our last workshop session? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Meeting minutes are approved and passed. Earlier this evening, we had an executive session pertaining to real estate and litigation matters. We will now proceed with the presentations, first beginning with the National League of Cities with Love My City. Okay, I was just made aware that we will skip this for now and reschedule it to later on in the agenda. So we will now begin with the item B, the presentation of the proclamation to the Elmwood Park Zoo, which I am very honored to do so. So will we have the members from the Elmwood Park Zoo? Wishes to hold this. Whereas Elmwood Park Zoo was established in 1924 when a local farmer transferred 16 acres and a menagerie to the borough of Norristown. And whereas Elmwood Park Zoo today is owned and operated by the Norristown Zoological Society, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to foster an appreciation for wildlife and the environment that will inspire active participation in conservation. And whereas Elmwood Park Zoo is the second most visited zoo in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And whereas Elmwood Park Zoo's original main purpose was to support and promote wildlife conservation. And whereas Elmwood Park Zoo has diligently and steadfastly served the Norristown community for over 95 years. And as a result of the significant role, Elmwood Park Zoo is one of the oldest zoos accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Now, therefore, the Norristown municipality recognizes and honors the momentous contributions of the Elmwood Park Zoo, and hereby, on its 95th anniversary, proclaims Tuesday, December 3rd, 2019 as Elmwood Park Zoo Day. Thank you, congratulations, and thank you for all that you do for our community. It is greatly appreciated, and Mr. Alzone himself is Mr. Norristown. So, again, on behalf of council, we appreciate all that you do. You're quite welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Quite welcome. Now you have to follow through with this.
Thank you so
You're
much.
quite welcome. And if you could, just please walk around to council and shake hands. Next order of business we have is the Citizens Leadership Academy, who will receive their program certificates tonight from council. We'll be with you momentarily.
Sorry about that. It's been a busy evening here. So we are here to recognize the Citizens Leadership Academy cohort. This is the 7th cohort, the 6th year for this program, the first in this area, recognized regionally. People call us and ask us how we run this program, what they can do to have similar programs. This is something that I'm extremely proud of. We have, I think with this group, we have 116, maybe 120 folks that have gone through the program. And the Citizens Leadership Academy brings in residents and business owners and educates them on local government, the ins and outs of the activities that council partakes in, department heads that get to meet them firsthand. They get to network and ask questions and get really a insightful, firsthand, intimate view of how the municipality works and why we do some of the things we do, why we go through some studies, why we take so long to get something done. You know, it just really gets to the nitty and gritty. And it's a program that I am extremely proud. So tonight we are going to recognize 13 folks. A couple couldn't be here, but we have 13 in-house. So I will call your name if you come up, and Miss President Sanders, come up and shake everyone's hand, and then we'll get a group picture. Is that okay? So first is Connie Brady. And if you could just look at the camera, go ahead and shake. This is, yes, there you go. You got it? And if you just want to go around the room and shake hands, that'd be great. Thank you. Next up, we have Prudence Brown. There you go, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is John Coyle. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Should I step down some?
Yeah, please. Michael Fournier. Where's he? Michael? No, he's not here. Okay. I will get this to him. Rachel Forbes.
Awesome.
And if I could just add that Miss Forbes was in the cohort last year, couldn't finish up and came back this year to make sure she finished up. Yeah. Nadine Hitch. Thank you. Marie Kearney. There you go. Thank you.
Wow. Let me sit down some.
Steve Corwin. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I'm going to call these two up together. We usually have a husband and wife team. We've had like 3 or 4 sets of husband and wives. This is a mother-daughter team. Alba and Moza Kuki. Sorry if I said sound. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. That's it? No. Next up is James Gerald Perna.
No stranger to council.
Hey.
No stranger to council.
There you go.
Very good, very good.
You get him?
Oh my gosh. Next up, we have Mark Anthony Polsini. Where's he here? Thank you.
Another photograph together.
And last but not least, Wilani Sosa. Thank you.
Thanks.
Everybody, we'll do a group picture. Is that okay?
Yes.
I just grab this on the group picture. If we could get a group picture, that would be it for us, please. No, I'm a host. No, I don't want to. I don't want to be in. I'll take it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to do it here?
Could we just get up one more time, just for a group picture with
Yes.
with your certificates? We're gonna get a group picture. Yeah, just right here. Thank you.
Oh, there you go.
We're gonna have to squeeze a little bit here.
Yeah, come in some more.
Yeah, we have to bring it in. Bring it in. Right. There's a road right down there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You all look this way, please. 1, 2, 3.
Which one are we looking at? Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Congratulations.
Thank you all for having a vested interest in Norristown and having passion for your community and wanting to learn a little bit more about how council works. We hope to see some of your smiling faces on some of our vacancies on some of the committees that we have. And if you have any questions about any of the vacancies or what the committees entail, please feel free to seek out any council member. So thank you for your time and commitment. It is much appreciated. Moving on to the next order of business. Vice President Lewis, do we have any announcements this evening?
Yes, we do. The grand opening for the new Norristown Recreation Center is this Saturday, December 7th, from 10 to 1 at 1101 Harding Boulevard. Join us for giveaways, activities, tours, open gym, and refreshments. Elmwood Park Zoo is hosting a free admission day to Norristown residents on Sunday, December 8th, rescheduled from the Sunday with the snowstorm, from 10 to 4, and also the Wild Light Show starting at 5. Please bring proof of residency. The Plymouth Ambulance is holding a toy drive. A drop-off box can be found in the lobby of Municipal Hall now through December 13th. Please be advised that the Norristown Sewer Authority is relocating their offices to 25 East Marshall Street on December 9th. I'm going to add an announcement that CADCOM is hosting the VITA Free Income Tax Assistance Program starting January 28th of 2020. Income eligible Montgomery County residents can have their taxes done for free at the CADCOM locations throughout the county. Are there any other announcements from council? Councilman Jones.
Good evening. I wanted to share a job resource. Drew a blank. First Quality, King of Prussia, a large manufacturing company. They are looking to fill many positions. First Quality is located at 601 Allendale Road in King of Prussia. They have an on-site career fair tomorrow, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. They have another on-site career fair on Thursday the 5th from 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. They're looking to fill positions in manufacturing, engineering, and warehouse. One other announcement, the Norristown Men of Excellence, a nonprofit organization, is hosting an awards banquet this Saturday where they'll be honoring several folks throughout the community across various levels. The event will take place at the George Washington Carver Center starting at 1 p.m. Free to the public, and it will support local leaders in the community. Thanks.
Any other announcements from council? Councilwoman Scott Cooper.
Okay, the Help a Single Parent fundraiser will be held this coming Saturday, December 7th, from 7 p.m. to midnight. Tickets are $25. It will be held at the Cedar Club, 810 West Germantown Pike in Norristown. And just so that you know, for those who don't know, this is a fundraiser that's held every year to help single parents to be able to provide not only Christmas gifts and clothes for their children, but also a meal. So if you want more information, you can see me after the meeting tonight, or Councilwoman President Sonia Sanders as well. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Madam President, that concludes the announcements.
Thank you, Vice President Lois. Back to the presentations. We will now begin with the presentation for the comprehensive financial review by Davenport and Company.
Good evening, Madam President, members of council. With me this evening are Jennifer Dirksen and Joe Mason from Davenport and Company, our financial advisors. They're here this evening to discuss the comprehensive financial review and roadmap for the municipality. As you may recall, when you appointed Davenport as financial advisor late last summer, Joe and Jen promised to come back to us with a comprehensive financial review. We asked them to also include a possible roadmap for us going forward. There's some very interesting and significant possibilities financially moving forward, and we asked them to include that in their report, some of those items in their report. The written report you have in front of you is rather lengthy. It's about 40 pages. It's in 6 parts. Goals and objectives, the economic and demographic overview. You heard some of this information in our October 30 budget presentation. We focused for the most part, on municipalities in our neighborhood, if you will, in terms of comparative statistics. Davenport has expanded on this and pulled together some what we call peers throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, municipalities that are similar to Norristown in terms of population and finances and bond ratings and so on. So you'll hear an expanded version of the economic and demographic overview that we presented earlier. Part 3 is a general fund financial and debt analysis, followed by Part 4, a rating scorecard overview. And again, you may be familiar with much of this information based on a discussion we had with Standard & Poor's, our rating agency, sometime in August. Part 5 is capital needs and future borrowing plans, followed by Part 6, opportunities and next steps. We've asked them to get through the first 3 or 4 parts of the presentation as quickly as possible so that we can spend as much time as we possibly can on the last 2 parts, the capital needs and future borrowing and the next steps. This is where I think we'll get the biggest bang for our buck. So, Jen, Joe, take it away.
Great, thank you, Mr. Butts. And I must say that, well, this is a fairly lengthy tome. We will go through it quickly. And we also owe debt of gratitude to Mr. Butts and his fellow staff in the finance office. They provided us with a lot of information and good commentary along the way. So, if you turn with me to page 3, goals and objectives, this evening is really about providing you a little bit of perspective.
Excuse me. Could you please speak a little louder, or do we have a microphone available
I think
for everyone in the audience to hear?
maybe on the podium, I think there was a handheld.
I can try to speak louder. Is this better?
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Looking down at the page as opposed to projecting out.
That's only because you're back. Is facing the audience.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Will this work?
It doesn't work. This was shut.
If there's anything that you want to take away from this discussion this evening, it's one, the importance of your fund balance reserves, which is critically important. They've been going down, we want them to go up, and there are tools and strategies that we can employ by borrowing for projects that you've already approved as a council. And we're going to talk about some of those strategies because they can be a means to help restore the fund balance. So there's a lot of information coming at you, but that's my hope, is that the takeaway is that fund balance is important. Having a structurally balanced budget between revenues and expenditures without use of reserves, which are frankly one-time monies, having a structurally balanced budget and gradually restoring your fund balance reserves to the level they were previously at is something that we really want you to take away from this discussion tonight.
So if you turn behind tab B to the economic and demographic overview, I'll go through this quickly. As Mr. Butt said, you saw similar information in a previous budget presentation. If you look at slide 5, this is the peer group that we've compared the municipality to. And the reason that this peer group was chosen was because it is similar in population, tax base size, and wealth levels, as well as rating category as well. If you flip to the next page, this is an overview of the municipality's full valuation. You can see that the municipality's market value has increased slightly over the last 10 years, although assessments have remained flat, which obviously impacts property tax revenue. And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that the municipality's tax base compares favorably to the A+ or A1 median, while it remains below the AA- or AA3 median. It is also similar to the peer average. If you flip to the following slide, this gives you an overview of income growth over the last 5 years. The municipality's income levels have changed little since 2012, as you can see, and are below both national medians and the peer group. However, it is important to note that local income levels may underestimate the actual fundamental economic strength. Given that Norristown participates in a broader metropolitan area, this helps bring non-resident spending to the community, and I think you can see that in the following slide. And this is just showing the municipality compared to both the county and another township within the county, Upper Marion, and just showing that these areas surrounding the municipality do have some higher income, which will contribute to the revenues for the Norristown. And then with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Joe to go through the general fund financial.
I'm on page 10. Give you a moment to get there. So as I said, having a structural balance between recurring revenue and recurring expenditures is a critical underpinning to overall financial health of a community. Your budget has been growing on the revenue side at a slower rate than expenditures over the past 5 years, which means that your fund balance, your available reserves, cash you have in the bank for a rainy day, has been falling, and it's down by about 9% since 2014. This was not the only factor, but it was certainly a contributing factor when S&P recently decided to lower the municipality's credit rating by 1 notch. Restoring that structural balance and getting that fund balance back up will be critical to restoring or even improving upon that rating. And Jennifer will talk about a few rating strategies that can further help you along the way. So page 11, this is really here just it's background information for your reading pleasure in case you're having a tough time sleeping some night this week. Historical performance, similar. It is information that is of some value, but I would point out at the bottom of the page, to the municipality's credit, you typically budget fairly conservatively, meaning your revenues come in slightly better than what was estimated, and your expenditures are managed well, and typically, not always, but typically will come in under that which is budgeted. Of course, that excludes the use of fund balance in that equation. On 13, in terms of your fund balance reserves, you have a current policy of 16.7%. That's effectively 2 months worth of operations. There's a stated goal to increase that to 20 to 25%, which is more in line with your peers and neighbors, and that's a worthwhile goal. As I have sort of said already, but I want to reemphasize the point, your fund balance is the single most important factor when Standard & Poor's or any other rating agency for that matter is looking at your credit. Both of us used to be analysts at different credit rating agencies, but we can tell you the first thing that an analyst does is crack open your audit and go right to the fund balance and look at it as what is it a percentage of your budget. So the fact that we've had this gradual decline, and again, the 19 budget, again appropriated fund balance, that's a trend that we want to stop and start moving in the opposite direction. And again, we'll talk about some tools to get there. And it's highlighted, frankly, in the bottom right-hand corner of the page. If you look at the medians for effectively A1 and AA3 are equivalent to A+ and AA- at S&P. But those are the medians at over 30%, and you're just above 20%, but had been as high as 35% back in 2014. Another key point on this page, before we leave page 13, one of the ways that you can sort of, in a good way, institute some better control over the use of fund balance in the budget is to basically require, as a body, that if council decides that they want to use fund balance, that it be limited only for one-time, non-recurring purposes, such as capital, equipment, something of that nature that's not recurring, things like salaries and so forth. Use it for one-time purposes, and if for some reason you vote to, let's say you're going through a bad time economically, if you have to use those reserves below, say, a 20% level, that use is allowed, but it requires a supermajority vote from amongst yourselves to do that, and it also requires that a multi-year plan be put in place to restore those reserves to their prior level within the constrained period of time. We've used a policy like this in several places, and the rating agencies are highly pleased with a policy of this nature. So that's one thing we would recommend. On page 14, again, as I noted, the fiscal 19 budget, again, utilized about $1.4 million in reserves. The total fund balance percentage has been going down, and if we keep continuing to appropriate fund balance for operating purposes, or dipping into it for one-time expenditures, ultimately that's not sustainable. Fund balance simply represents the accumulation of surpluses over the years from good budgeting, good expenditure management, but it's one-time money. Once it's used, it's gone. The only way to get more of it is to generate more surpluses. Jen's going to talk about that.
Yep. So on slide 15, this is an overview of the municipality's outstanding debt. You can see that at the end of 18, the municipality had about 26.5 million outstanding, which will go down to about 22.2 million at the end of fiscal 19. If you flip to the following slide, this shows the principal payout ratio, which really measures how rapid the debt retirement is. Obviously, the more rapid the debt retirement, the more financial flexibility the municipality has to utilize that money for either additional capital projects or additional debt service. You can see here that you have a principal payout ratio of about 82.8%. Which is higher than national medians. But one thing to note is this also places significant near-term budgetary pressure on the municipality. And you can see, if you look at the chart on the bottom right-hand side, you can see, there are more significant debt service payments fiscal 19, which is obviously coming through a close through 2022 until it drops off significantly in 2023. The next two slides provide sort of a high-level overview of four key debt ratios, which we're going to go through in following slides. So I'm going to sort of skip over those and go through the specific slides themselves. So if we turn to slide 19, this basically shows the historical debt outstanding versus the debt limit that's set by the state. And you can see that the municipality's outstanding debt is well below the debt limit that is established by the state, giving a significant room for growth there. That being said, if you flip to the following page, the municipality currently has a debt to assessed value policy of 5%, so more stringent than the state policy. But you can see in the chart on the right that the municipality's tax-supported debt is actually slightly higher than national averages and the peer group. And while the current policy is at 5%, looking at the ratios where they currently stand, as well as the ratios when taking into account your upcoming debt, we think that you could potentially lower that to 4%, which would be viewed very favorably by S&P. On the next slide, you'll see debt service to expenditures, which is another ratio that the rating agencies look at, and it really measures debt affordability. Currently, the municipality has a 15% debt to general fund revenues. And one thing to note is while the municipality's policy takes into account general fund revenues. The rating agencies typically look at debt service to expenditures, so that's why you see it in the chart on the right-hand side. And you can see that this metric has actually been decreasing since 2014, which is a positive. Although if you look at the top right chart, you'll see that Norristown is still above both the peer average and the national medians. That being said, we think keeping the 15% policy is still valid given the fact of where you are currently and your upcoming debt needs.
Well, let's just pause there for a second. One of the reasons your debt service to expenditures ratio is high is because your amortization of that debt is extraordinarily rapid. So the faster you pay it off, the higher your current debt service payments are. It was one of the first things we noticed when we started looking at the data was you've got a variety of different amortizations of different projects, different bond issues that don't track any logical pattern that we were able to discern. So one of the things we're going to be talking about is taking some of your existing debt, which was funded on a very short-term nature, and better matching that debt service with the useful lives of the assets that the borrowing actually paid for. So in other words, reshaping, restructuring that debt to make it better match what you actually spent the money on.
No, you're fine. And then if you turn to slide 22, the last key ratio that the rating agencies have been looking at is what's called fixed costs. So this is looking at not only your debt service, but also your annual pension and OPEB contributions as a percentage of the budget. Obviously, the higher that percentage, the less financial flexibility the municipality has. And you can see positively that since 2015, this ratio has been coming down, but our recommendation would be that you adopt a policy that fixed costs do not exceed 25%. This is a percentage that the rating agencies typically look for. Once it goes above the 25%, the rating agencies sort of view that as an outsized fixed cost liability. Then just turning over to the next section on slide 24, this is just a brief overview of the current S&P scorecard. And the few things I want to point out here is that currently, if you look at the S&P scorecard, which is on the left-hand side, this is from your July 19 report, you'll see that management was rated strong. We think that with some of these policy revisions that we're talking about, that could be moved from strong to very strong. In addition, if you look at budgetary performance, you're currently getting an accurate for that particular measurement. But we believe that this could potentially move to strong if the municipality begins adopting structurally balanced budgets, as Mr. Mason has already discussed, as well as increasing reserves closer to those peer medians that we saw in earlier slides. Finally, if you look at the debt and contingent liabilities, that's currently ranked as weak. And by utilizing some of the debt strategies that Mr. Mason will talk about in the next section, we think that we could provide some budgetary relief and have a positive effect on this metric. And with those changes, if you look on the right-hand side, if those did come to fruition, you'll see that you would end at a AA category, which is actually 2 notches above your current rating and would make for a very strong case to for a rating upgrade. So these are just some of the factors we think that could be impacted with some time.
The scorecard is, by the way, is like your golf score. The lower it is, the better it is. Just want to point that out.
Yes, and then slide 25 is simply graphically showing those specific metrics that we were talking about before. And 26 is just a summary of the recommendations. So as Mr. Mason mentioned, obviously reserves have declined, and with additional pressure expected in the near term, in order to help the financial position of the municipality, we think that adopting a strengthened fund balance policy that's more in line with peers, as well as the revised debt policies that we talked about, would be very well received and put the municipality in an overall better financial position. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Mason to talk about capital needs and future borrowing plans.
Okay, thank you. This is really the crux of tonight's discussion. So how do we restore the reserves that we've already utilized and get back to the ability to have structurally balanced budgets? We can't always, not every community is fortunate enough to be able to tax its way to financial prosperity. So we have to look at other tools to accomplish that. So just to set the table here on page 28, this is your going forward capital plan. As we received it from the finance office, we understand there have been a couple of late-breaking developments. One is the renovation cost of this facility that's gone up a little bit, and then I believe there's an economic development land acquisition that's going to require a temporary $900,000 general fund interfund loan with capital projects. So that's roughly $3.9 million is not factored into this analysis. It won't change it too materially, but I note it for the record.
And just if I could add something there, and Joe and Jen haven't had an opportunity to really have this information since we just got it from the architects a week or so ago, but not only is the cost of the renovation, the scope of the renovation changed, the cost also changed, but we think the acceleration of the project, given the flood that we experienced a month or so ago, that the building is going to go faster than was originally anticipated, and therefore we flipped some of the funds around, which isn't shown on page 28. It doesn't, as Joe mentioned, materially change what we're going to recommend going forward, but these numbers are somewhat out of date, is all I want to say.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Butts. I feel like I've neglected this side of the room. Hi. So a couple of key assumptions to keep in mind as we go forward. What I'm first going to do is identify for you a strategy that we recommend that you consider regarding an approach to how you do the borrowing for this program, this 2020 capital improvement plan. The strategy is going to be more flexible, easier on your budget, and generate some financial benefits too along the way. And then we're going to talk about looking at your existing debt and seeing what might be done with that to further enhance your budgetary cash flow and help you get back to reserve levels that are more consistent with the higher rating level. So first of all, we're going to think about it as you're going to do your capital plan as you would conventionally. So in this example, we've assumed that for this building, since it's been here for a long time and will continue to be here for a long time, we've amortized or paid off the principal amount of the bonds over a 30-year time horizon. For everything else, we've done it over 20 years. So on page 29, a lot of numbers on the page, but this is what happens. You end up with effectively a peak debt service of $4.6 million in 2021 if nothing else changes. So the concept that we'd like to introduce is doing something called a bond anticipation note. And this can be in two forms. One, and the form we'd probably go for is the one that's called a drawdown bond anticipation note. This just shows a fixed 3-year bond anticipation note as if you got all the proceeds at closing. So what a bond anticipation note is an instrument that you pay interest only. It's called short-term debt. You pay interest only until the final maturity, and then you take out that bond anticipation note with a long-term borrowing. Okay, so in this example, we would do a 3-year bond anticipation note, and then in the 4th year, you would do your borrowing and then begin repaying principal after that. So what does that do for you? Let's look at page 31. Remember, under the traditional approach where our peak debt service was about $4.6 million, by utilizing the band strategy, we've dropped that to about $4.2627 million and save the municipality roughly $370,000 a year for the next 3 years, for a total of over $1.2 million in budgetary cash flow savings over a 6-year period. So little changes like that add up to a reasonable sum of money that you otherwise would have to provide for out of normal general fund tax revenue. Page 32 just does our homework in terms of how the band strategy impacts your debt ratios. It doesn't have a great impact on either one of them. So I'd like to talk, wanting to leave some time for questions, I'd like to talk on page 33 about potential refunding and restructuring opportunities. In the current market, with the current interest rates you have on your existing debt, there's no real economic opportunity to refinance traditionally like you would if you refinanced your home mortgage, where you exchange a higher interest rate for a lower interest rate. The good news for you is that your interest rates are so low that we don't have any rates out there that are lower enough to go out and refinance any of your debt. So that's a good thing. You've been getting good market rates on your bond issues. However, as I spoke about earlier, you do have some bond issues that are amortized over a very short period of time, considering that we're purchasing or building governmental assets that generally last 20, 30 years or longer. So we want to look at the possibility of potentially restructuring that debt to see what sorts of cash flow savings could be generated. And the two candidates for doing that are noted for you on page 34. There was a note done in 2017 for 5 years. We are going to re-amortize that over 20. And then there was a piece of the taxable general obligation bonds of 2017 that were originally 15-year bonds, and those could be taken out as far as 30 years. So what does that accomplish for us on page 35? If we do that, let's look at the graphic on the right-hand side. The dark green line is your current debt service. So you see it stays high through 2022 and then drops off a cliff and then tapers down from there. So in the restructuring case, which is the light green columns or bars, you'll see that we're taking debt service out of that peak, which is an artificial peak that was an accumulation of a number of bond issues that were borrowed over a shorter period of time than they probably should have been. We're not judging, but I mean, all those reasons and rationale predate most of us. So by re-amortizing a couple of those pieces, we're able to generate $5.2 million in savings, gross cash flow savings, from fiscal year 20 through 2022. Now, you might ask yourself, if we move principal out and we extend the period of time that loans will be outstanding, won't we be paying more interest on that debt? And the answer is, of course, that's true. But you're also paying in future dollars that are not worth as much as dollars are today. So in order to do a thorough economic analysis of that, we've got to ask ourselves, what's the present value of moving those cash flows around? It's going to be slightly negative. In this case, it's $352,000 negative on a present value basis, which I would suggest to you, compared to immediate budgetary cash flow relief of over $5 million, $352,000 over 20 to 25 years is, relatively speaking, not a major issue. And on page 36, you can see the actual budgetary cash flow benefit of combining what we're recommending is the bond anticipation note approach and the restructuring of the two pieces of existing debt. And in the far right-hand column, compared to a do nothing or do everything in just the way as you've done it strategy, there are budgetary savings in 2020 of $2.9 million and $2.5 million in 2021. So we think this buys you a window of opportunity to bring your budget back into structural balance, add money to reserves, or potentially gives you some cash for economic development projects, if you want to invest in the community, to try to grow the economy, and which in turn would help your revenues, that's certainly an option as well. In our experience, the safest play is to put the money in the bank and get your fund balance where it needs to be from a ratings perspective, and that's what we'd recommend, but we don't sit on your side of the dais, and you've got to make these decisions. We're just here to tell you the options. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Dirksen to take us to the close here.
So if you look on slide 38, this really just summarizes the opportunities that Mr. Mason sort of just went through in order to help stabilize and improve the financial health of the municipality. You know, this just goes through, you know, what we already talked about, adopting the updated reserve and debt policies, you know, matching the amortizations with the useful life of the assets, as well as looking at the restructuring of the debt to do that as well and provide some budgetary cash flow for Norristown. You know, and with the implementation of those recommendations and a well-crafted rating presentation, we think with time that could help the municipality get back to regain its AA- rating that it had prior to the action that was taken this past July. In addition, we think that either an in-person rating meeting or even going up to New York and starting a face-to-face relationship with S&P would be something else to consider and be beneficial going forward as well. And finally, on 39, next steps, this just gives an idea of how we plan to move forward with the bond issuance. Obviously, we would be happy to answer any questions this evening or any follow-up questions that you might have after this meeting. As far as going forward, starting in January and going through March, we would assist the municipality in putting together what's called an official statement, which is required for a bond issuance as well as a credit presentation. I do believe that revised financial policies are going to be considered in January, and so that would be just in time before the rating agency meetings would happen. And then we'd look to a bond sale in March of next year. So with that, we would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So I just have one request, if I may. To be fair to the constituents, they didn't have a package to follow. So if I could please have you or Mr. Mason face the constituents and provide a brief 2-minute summary of what the report is and how it benefits Norristown and where we're trying to go with this report.
Sure. So this is what the council is looking at. It's a financial review that we prepared from data provided by the municipality and from other public sources of information. The municipality is always looking for good strategies for improving its budgetary performance, the amount of savings, if you will, to put it in the terms of a citizen. The amount of savings in the municipality's bank account has been dwindling, and that's had a negative effect on its credit rating. Not a major one, but a minor one, but one that we want to get turned around. Because a credit rating is important because it tells you, just as it is in your own personal lives, your own personal credit rating drives how much you pay in interest and whether or not you get credit. So it's in the municipality's interest to have the highest possible credit rating that it can. And this is a municipality that is always, at least as we go back and look at the history, it operates, most local governments do, but Norristown in particular operates under a fairly tight budget. And so what we've done is come up with a couple of strategies using the town's existing debt portfolio and planned future borrowing to try to generate some budgetary cash flow relief that would be able to be recycled, if you will, back into that savings account so the reserves can go back up and the rating can go back up, and everybody is feeling better about the municipality from a financial perspective. Fair. Okay, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And one of the things, if I could add to that, Joe, we have a few extra copies of the presentation here. If anybody's dying to have one tonight, we can probably help you out. But also, we'll try to put this online tomorrow, and anyone that wants a hard copy of it tomorrow or going forward, we certainly would provide them. Not a problem to do that. I think that what Davenport has presented tonight is an opportunity for the community going forward to take advantage of some financial management techniques to give us some breathing room to come up with a 5-year plan at least, and maybe extending it out beyond 5 years to try to see what we can do in the longer term instead of just going from year to year. And a lot of municipalities do this. They deal with only the current year and they worry about next year when it comes along. I think we have an opportunity here, particularly with the amount of money that we're going to be investing in the assets of the community, starting with the police station and the administrative services facility here. We have an opportunity to really do some things that I think are going to have some long-range, long-term advantage for us. So the report is here. If you'd like to see a copy of it, we can make a copy available to you online. And if you call us, we'll email or mail you or make sure you get a copy of it, because it's public information, obviously. And anybody that wants it certainly is welcome to have it. And will be available to ask any questions after you look at it. It's 40 pages. Some of it is, I don't think it's dense, but I've been in this business for 50 years. But if there are things that you're not sure of, you can call me. I'll give you Davenport's number. You can call Jen or Joe, and we'll get the answers for you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Brady.
Thank you. Thank you for your report. Very interesting. I'm curious, though, how you arrived at the criteria for peer communities, because in looking at this list on page 13, these communities are nothing like ours.
Yes, so we came up with the peers that are included due to, population, tax base size, and wealth levels. This is similar to what S&P would look at when they did a credit review. So we included some that are rated above you, some that are rated, I believe, below you as well, just to give a sense of how you compare to various rating categories as we went through the different metrics. But that's sort of how those 3 criteria is really how we came up with the peer categories.
Councilman Jones.
Thanks for your presentation. All right, so I have 2 questions. That kind of struck a chord with me. 2012 to current, our incomes haven't raised much. What I do know about Norristown is that many people that work in Norristown do make some solid incomes between the different institutions and the different companies and the private sector. So what are some creative ways that you might have seen people in townships capturing those folks? Because, the incomes are coming from this community, but they might not be the current residents. That's one question. My other question was, we budget fairly conservative and our expenditures are managed pretty well. So I'm more concerned with why our ratings are dropping, given the fact that we seem to be, doing things correctly.
I'll answer the second question first, which is, yes, you manage your expenditures fairly well. There aren't constant cost overruns, but when there are votes taken mid-year to spend money that wasn't originally budgeted in the budget, for whatever purpose, I'm not making a judgment of it, you can sometimes end up with a use of fund balance, and that fund balance continues to go down. Remember, it was 35% in 2014, and now it's 22%. So, and it's, while it's still technically above your policy, it's, all rating agencies operate on trend analysis. When they see a recurring trend of you're dipping into fund balance for whatever reason, and you're getting closer to your policy or even below your policy, then that tells them that that they have a concern that the municipality is has a conviction around maintaining its financial health, and they have to signal that to investors. And the way they do that is through some sort of adverse rating action. And the first question.
I mean, our incomes haven't moved since 2012, but I know for a fact there's some solid, heavy incomes that are coming from this community. So I'm just curious, you work in different townships, municipalities. What are some of those townships doing to capture that income from some of these high-powered institutions and money?
Yeah, I mean, I think, these are obviously from the Census Bureau. I mean, these are medians and averages, so you're going to have, some that are lower, some that are higher captured in here. And I think that's what we were trying to sort of do with the other slide. And I think the point that we want to make is, while, incomes have changed very little since 2012, you're sort of part of this broader metropolitan base. And I think that's sort of the argument that you would make to a rating agency or otherwise to show that it's you sort of garner something from being part of that broader municipality, broader base.
I'm
Sorry, go ahead.
And just to follow up on that, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, even though we're a home rule municipality, we are somewhat limited in terms of the taxation that we can enact. In answer to your question as to how we get that income from surrounding communities, the thing that comes to mind most readily to me, and it's not a lot of money, but it is the local services tax, the LST, which allows us to tax up to $52 a year for non-residents, all people working in Norristown, including non-residents. So that's one tiny way that we do that. Other than that, I don't know of anything under state law that would allow us to increase, to tap into more of that wealth that's coming into the community. Thanks.
Council, any other questions? Councilman Curry?
Thank you for your presentation once again. One of the things I wanted. Can you hear me? All right. Well, I was speaking loud anyway, so you probably could have heard me anyway. Thanks for the presentation once again. When you're talking about these bonds, obviously I'm one to always talk about the stock market going up and down and what it could do in regards to this, that if it does. But how would we be able to make a success off of the bonds if the market was crashing? And then with the amortization, when was the last time that we even looked at that, which is probably the root of the problem, which we probably should have changed many, many years ago? The document that you said needs to be changed, updated?
Well, if I understand the question, and Joe and Jen could probably speak to this more clearly than I can. I don't know that the stock market itself is going to have an impact on interest rates in the bond market.
We'll answer that. Could you address the other part of the question about the document?
Well, the document, if I understand the question, in terms of our fiscal policies, we have a document that's been prepared, a revision to bring to council, and I talked to Mr. Jones about bringing it to council before the end of the year, but you have so much on the calendar that we decided to hold off on that until the first of next year, when we get closer to going out into the bond market. We'll bring to you, I think, a rather comprehensive revision of our fiscal policies. Some of them are very good and they'll remain in place, There are some gaps. We've had some suggestions from Davenport and others how to fill in those gaps. We'll make some suggestions on that, and we'll tighten up our fiscal policies going forward. So we are going to do that. Another thing that we're going to do, hopefully, I mean, you drive the bus in regard to this. Our financial policies currently are in the administrative code, which is an ordinance which is much more difficult to amend than a resolution. What we're suggesting to council is we take those fiscal policies out of the administrative code, put them in a resolution, which will then give you the flexibility to, through resolution, to change them pretty much at will, obviously with notice on the agenda, but without the advertising cost and the rigmarole, if you will, that goes into passing an ordinance.
What we currently have right now, when was the last time that we even looked at that document?
It's been a while. I couldn't give you the answer off the top of my head, but I think that it's been somewhat piecemeal too. I'm finding frequently as I'm going through the history of the office that I'll find a policy here that deals with investments. I'll find a policy over here that deals with something else. And so bringing those all together with the fiscal policies that we have in the administrative code and putting it all in one place, I think it's going to make it easier for this council and certainly future councils in terms of keeping up to date with what the fiscal policies are and what they should be.
So if I heard you correctly, when you were talking, you were saying that some of the things that are on file doesn't make sense to you? Is that what I heard earlier?
Well, I don't know if it doesn't make sense, but I think some of them are somewhat out of date, and you know, the rating agencies are constantly, and it's not only S&P, it's Moody's and Fitch's. The rating agencies are evolving as time goes by, and our policies should have kept up with what the rating agencies were doing, and we've gotten a little behind. We're not outrageously behind, but there are some gaps and there's some things that need to be updated and revised. And we'll bring you what I think is a pretty comprehensive suggestion at the first of the year to do that.
And to follow up on your other part of your question, you know, the stock market ebbs and flows, the bond market does the same thing. If we were to have a significant correction in the stock market, you know, between now and the time we were to go to sale, that shouldn't affect the bond market. Notice I say shouldn't. There have been instances in the past, most recently 2009, the credit markets did seize up. You recall that there were, you know, Lehman Brothers failed, there were, you know, Fannie Mae and so forth were getting bailed out by the federal government and so forth. There was a period of a few weeks where going to the bond market was a dicey proposition, but that's one small period going back all the way prior to that to the Great Depression. So it doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. But I wouldn't base my decision about when to go to the bond market on what the stock market is doing in any given period of time.
Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Madam President. Council, I just wanted to kind of bring back to really the point of all of this and why it was important to have this conversation with Council tonight. As you know, we are heavily in budget season. You guys are going to make a decision regarding budget, and we know when we made budget presentations to Council that we saw what the gap was in terms of revenues versus expenditures, the issue of maybe having to rely on fund balance, having to rely on a tax increase to address that, and we know that the direction given to us as staff is, okay, find a way to mitigate that to the extent that we can. And this all goes back to the NRN process that we went through, where you all pretty much set a standard for multi-year looks at budget, which is what this is about. You all approved us to get Davenport as a different and a new financial advisor that was more than transactional, but that actually started working with staff on a constant basis to look at how we fiscally transform the organization. So this work is a result of all of that, and we think in terms of the work that's been going on, what we give you and what we're able to present to you is something that you desired, which was as little impact from a tax standpoint on residents as possible in terms of adopting what's going to be a 2020 budget, 2021 budget. And so this gives us, this approach gives us a lot of relief over the next 5 years in terms of mitigating that. And that's why we wanted to have this presentation tonight, because we know we're later going to be asking you to advertise a budget that proposes a 1 mil increase. And as in previous years, when we do that, we look at putting an increase in there, and then you having certainly the ability to lower it, but you can't raise it. And so we certainly give you that. But we think this approach and the work that the team has done with Davenport gives you much more positive flexibility in terms of long-term capital projects, long-term operating, and certainly an opportunity to have as least impact on residents in the near term in terms of tax increases. So that's why this discussion was important tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Council, any other questions, comments? Thank you for this presentation this evening. Much appreciated. So, Mr. Jones, are we ready for the next?
I heard the sound come up, and so we're going to hit the button. Okay. But it didn't.
Just turn that up. Just turn the knob up.
Yeah, keep pushing. As far as it goes. As far as it goes. And I heard we had something. Take my
Okay, since we're having technical difficulties, could we actually have this presentation online as well for the constituents to see? I think that Councilwoman Scott Cooper, I know she put a lot of effort into this video, and it's unfortunate that we can't see it tonight in terms of I Love My City from the National League of Cities, and that's something that council members actually have the opportunity to attend conferences and bring back some valuable information. Madam President, do we have any public comments this evening?
Good evening. I'm not sure how this works, so I'm just going to jump right into it. Amika Malcolm with... Oh, right.
Please state your name and your address.
Oh. So my name is Amika Malcolm, and I'm over here at 108 East Main Street, and I'm with the Norristown Community Garden, and I was invited by Olivia Brady tonight to speak, so thank you for inviting me, and us as a matter of fact, because there's 2 other gardeners in here. And we are... Oh, sorry. Do I end these out now? No. So like I said, we're with the Norristown Community Garden, and we have been on the State Hospital grounds for the past roughly almost 5 years. And we created the Norristown Community Garden with the hope to help develop community and create a healthy relationship and partnership within the community. Also, it was designed to help us to learn to grow our own food and promote a healthy lifestyle, share skills and gardening tips with each other, encourage people to cook more at home, and share recipe preserve and donate harvests to the wider community. Like I said, we're located on the Norristown State Hospital property. And currently we have over 54 plots, ranging from 8x4 to 16x4 plots. We have a garden season every year, and I'm sorry, I'm nervous. This year, for our garden, we added an additional 10 plots. So last year we were 44 plots. This year we're up to 54 plots with a total of 22 gardeners. And this doesn't include people who volunteer with us from the community on a regular basis. We usually start our garden year with a community garden cleanup and kickoff, where everybody in the community come out and help clean up the garden from the previous year. This year we got some ducks and geese in the garden, which was fun, but we sadly had to give them up because the person who was really an expert in them had to leave us. So we were so busy we didn't have the chance to take care of them, so we had to relocate the ducks and the geese. The kids really loved those. I must say that those were really great. This year from people who reported their harvest, over 800 pounds of food was harvested from the garden that was reported. This doesn't include people who didn't report stuff. 193 pounds of that food was shared with local food bank or the Coordinated Homeless Outreach Center, CHOC, and Hope Works, where we were able to prepare some of the food for people who did not know or wasn't sure what to do with the food. So we did cooking classes or cooking demonstration for people to get an idea of what they could do with some of the stuff. 217 pounds were shared within the general community between friends and neighbors, and 335 pounds was used for personal use. This year, one of our major projects was realigning our plots and installing new plots. Like I said, we had 10 plots from last year. We had a budget of $2,815. $250 we got from Penn State. They're one of our biggest supporters. Local donations, we got $250. We also got a grant from the Pollination Project this year of $1,000, which will roll over into next year because we didn't get a chance to use it because it was towards the end of the garden season. So we're looking forward to seeing how we use that. Also, we had the Boy Scout build a duck house for us, but we weren't able to use it this year, so we're going to use it for our tool shed. Sorry. Oh my God. All right. And so for next year, we're looking for your support as usual. Well, you guys have been supporting us. Oh my God. Where am I? I just want to acknowledge some people while I'm here. So the State Hospital ground to begin with, and the municipality because you guys have been really supportive, especially Olivia Brady, and the Greener Partners, and a lot of the local businesses. That's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I'm so glad Amika was able to come here and just let us know about what's going on with the community garden. When I had the opportunity to read an email, since I'm on the list, I invited her to share those good news with us. So I'm glad. Thank you so much for your presentation and for the handout so that we're all aware of all the good things that the community garden are doing. Thank you. That's all.
Madam Secretary, do we have any communication this evening?
No, we do not.
Next order of business we have are the appointments, and we'll begin with resolution number 19-163, appointments to the citizen boards and committees. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam President. Council, you have before you that resolution 19-163, which is an appointment to Nick Valla, who is being requested to be appointed to the Board of Code Appeals. I shared with you Mr. Valla's credentials, backgrounds. He's actually a new resident of Norristown who wants to be active and involved. And with that, we'll offer that for council's consideration.
Council, any questions or comments? Seeing none, would a member of council like to make a motion to appoint Nick Falla to the Board of Code Appeals? Madam Secretary, may I please have roll call?
Olivia Brady, Valerie Scott Cooper, Hakeem Jones, Derek Perry, Rebecca Smith, Heather Lewis, Sonia Sanders.
Aye. The ayes have it. Resolution number 19-163 is approved and passed. Next order of business we have is from the Municipal Administrator, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam President. Council, you have before you resolution number 19-162, and this is for council to consider appointment of Tri-State Financial Group, LLC, as the municipal amusement tax administrator. We actually interviewed both Berkheimer and Tri-State as potential administrators of the fund. We actually found Tri-State to be much more responsive and much more accessible. They're right across the bridge as well. And we got a favorable negotiated rate for them. We have budgeted an anticipated budget just being on the conservative side of $100,000 in revenue as a result of the amusement tax. Their rate is 2.3% of whatever is collected, which would amount to essentially $2,300 for the collection of that $100,000 and all the administrative duties that go along with that. And so our request is that council consider this appointment and appoint them to this 3-year contract.
Council, any questions or comments? Councilwoman Smith.
During the process when we were looking at implementing the amusement tax or beginning to recollect the amusement tax, we had consistently pointed everybody who asked us questions to ask their questions to Berkheimer. Will we re-communicate with all of those stakeholder groups effectively to say, communicate with Tri-State if we approve them tonight, and point them to a point of contact that they can have their questions answered?
That's absolutely correct. As soon as they are appointed and we met with them, we provided a clean list of the businesses who we believe that would be eligible for that tax. They then are going to put together the communication, reach out to all of those folks with a letter that includes not only introduction to themselves and understanding of the process, a description of what the amusement tax does, and the process that they would go through for appeals and getting other information. They're going to provide copies of all of that information that they put together, and we're going to also make sure that there's a link on our website. We'll have the information in finance, administration, and other departments, so that if we get walk-in questions about it as well, we'll make sure. But they will become the administrators of record and make that well known.
Thank you. Follow-up question. If their rates are better, their customer service is better, and they're closer, should we be looking at them for other local tax services?
That is a great question. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Butts and I have had extensive discussion about that. And we're right now going to be getting with the solicitor to look at, I know there's at least one or two things that are by law, Berkheimer is baked in, but those things that they aren't baked in, we really like these folks for administering some of our other collections as well.
Thank you.
Councilman Jones.
Hey, Crandall, so this is the first I learned of a list being created. How were the companies and, I guess, nonprofits and businesses identified to be on this list to be part of the amusement tax? And what are some of the methods that the tax will be collected?
Right. We actually got the list of all businesses that are in Norristown from the Berkheimer list, and essentially are going to turn that list over to these folks, and they're going to then go through and cull through that list to make sure that it's not that everybody is on that list is automatically there. These are the commercial entities. Part of what their job and what we're paying them for is to go through, look at that list, find out who on that list this really applies to and reach out to them. I'll have to, if legally we can share it, I don't have any problem doing it. I think we'd probably have to do some redactions, but I don't think we have any problem doing that. Well, again, we do the redactions that we needed to do. I mean, part of what we want to make sure is that people's information that needs to be protected is protected. And then that information that we can share, we definitely can.
Mr. Solicitor, could you inform us if there are any ramifications if any of that data was to be released to the public?
Yes, in relation to tax collection delinquencies and stuff, people have certain rights of privacy. If the municipality released that erroneously or in violation of the law, we could be suspect. So we will get with the municipal administrator, review the law, and release what we can.
Thank you, Mr. Solicitor. Councilman Jones?
So for the record, I'm not concerned on who owes the municipality taxes. I'm more concerned on who's identified as the type of business or nonprofit organization that is susceptible to an amusement tax versus who is not. So I only ask for maybe a name. I'm not asking for anybody's personal information, but it could be something down the line that could identify a few folks, but also exclude others. So I think it's smart that we are a little transparent about getting the right companies out publicly.
Thank you, Councilman Jones. Councilman Perry?
Mr. Solicitor, I'm not sure if I can do this or not, but I don't know if we want to go ahead and vote. I have a motion not to do that and protect the municipality at the end of the day. Is that doable to do that, Mr. Solicitor? To make sure that we can vote on that to protect, the municipality?
We will always protect the municipality. We will get back, myself and the municipal administrator will converse, get to do what we can do by law, and obviously we'll report back to council. I don't think a formal vote to do that is needed. That's what we'll do.
Okay, so I'll call the question then.
Would a member of council like to appoint Tri-State Financial Group, LLC, as the municipal amusement tax administrator to collect all amusement taxes on behalf of the municipality?
Second.
Madam Secretary, may I please have roll call?
Libby Brady? Recuse. Valerie Scott Cooper? Hakeem Jones? Derek Perry? Rebecca Smith?
Aye.
Heather Lewis? Sonia Sanders?
Aye. The ayes have it. Resolution number 19-162 is approved and passed. Next order of business we have is the update on the potential Norristown Municipal Waste Authority and authorization to request bids.
Thank you, Madam President. And we're going to ask our consultants with PFM and to come up, and also Tom White, our attorney in this matter, to come up, share with the public a brief overview of what's going on, so that public will be aware of what council is considering in this process. Thank you.
All right. Well, good evening again. Again, Scott Shear with Public Financial Management. Just a real quick update regarding the potential sewers exploration, the sale of that system. So just a few brief points that Tom and I and the rest of the team kind of have been doing here for, well over a year, just to sort of backtrack a little bit and kind of get us to where we are right now. So the process started back in the latter part of 2018, where we first sent out a request for qualification, or an RFQ, to a pretty long list of potential...
Excuse me.
Yes.
Could you please face the constituents?
Oh, sure.
Unfortunately, tonight they were challenged with presentations and with the backs
face towards them. So.
No, absolutely. And again, feel free to ask any questions. So, again, kind of backing up, this has been going on for quite a while as far as the process that we've undertaken to explore the potential sale of Norristown's sewer system. So back in the fall of 2018 is when the team consisting of Tom and I, legal and financial, and a few other folks started the process with a request for qualification. So we sent out this RFQ to about 150 or so potential interested investors into the system, whether they're private equity investors or other utility systems, regulated or non-regulated, that we know have interest in these kind of systems around the state. We received 2 responses, which is typical for this kind of asset, one from American Water and the other from Aqua Pennsylvania, that were, both those firms were then what we call shortlisted or pre-qualified to continue in the due diligence process. After that time, and even during that time, the team, along with Norristown, gathered a lot of information about the system. We did our due diligence on it. We put it then in what's called a virtual data room for the investors to have the same access, or those pre-qualified bidders to have the same access to that data so they can do their due diligence as well. We then brought the 2 teams into Norristown back in the spring of this year, where we conducted, I'll say, half-day meetings, where we did kind of a presentation in the building here with the interested parties, let them kind of get them more familiar with the system, took them also on a tour of Norristown, as well as let them take a tour of the system itself. They came back for additional tours, additional visits as well to the sewer system, to the treatment plant, for additional due diligence. So again, that occurred in the spring. Then, kind of around that same time, Tom began the drafting of the main document that would be related to the sale, if that's the direction everyone wants to move forward with, and that's called an asset purchase agreement, or you'll hear us refer to it as an APA. And so, Tom, if you would just speak a few words about that asset purchase agreement.
Sure. An asset purchase agreement can be fairly lengthy and involved with some of the most important. I apologize. I didn't think it was working. Good evening. Sorry about that. An asset purchase agreement can be fairly lengthy and involved. It sets forth all of the assets that are going to be sold and the purchase price, but it also does some important things that were a high priority for council. One is ensuring that the employees in the system are taken to the new system and are all given employment. And the second is some assurances around rates to make sure that there is no rate shock with respect to customers after the sale. And that's the main piece.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So and again, during that time, the bidders have had the access or the ability to ask a lot of questions, and they're still asking questions about the system. Again, we're talking about a very large asset, very valuable asset. So of course, they're going to continue to do their due diligence up until the very end of the process that they're allowed to. So that's basically kind of what the team has been doing for the past year and a half on getting us to this point. So now before us this evening is kind of just an update, but also we're looking for an authorization to now go to the next major milestone of this process, which is actually releasing the RFB, or request for bid. And so that's this evening. We could be in a position to actually get the request for bid out to the 2 bidders, say right before the holidays, right around December 20th or so. We also need to visit the authority again to get their okay to send out the RFB, or the request for bid. If we stick to that timeline, then we'd be looking for the actual bids. And when we say bids, that's actually, they're going to be putting forth a proposal of what they would want to buy the system for. And in there, we're also going to ask for indicative rates that would be charged to the ratepayers here of Norristown as well. But really, the main crux of the RFB is the actual purchase price. And we're going to have a couple different options in that document that they're going to bid on. We'd be looking for responses early February. We're saying February 7th when we get those responses back, or at least by that date. Then we come before the board to discuss the proposals that came forward. At that point, we don't know which direction it's going to go yet. The board has the choice at that point in time to If the bids come in below expectations, we can just stop the process at that point in time, and no further action required. The board could take the choice of having, doing more meetings and exploring the bids a little bit further. Again, I'm sure we'd be back here in a public setting if that's the case for at least one public meeting to discuss the results of that proposal. And again, we'll see kind of where that goes depending on how the bids come in. And that could be a couple-month process. I mean, right now we're assuming maybe the February, March, April timeframe, and then we'd like to be in a position to have the board consider approval of transaction, if applicable, at that point in time, say by late spring, maybe May of next year. Now, if that would be approved at that point in time, it would probably take 9 months to a year for that transaction to actually close. When the municipality would actually receive the funds in hand. So again, it's a very lengthy process, but again, we're talking about a very complicated asset that the bidders are looking at. So the expectations are that these kind of processes always do take a long time. So that's generally where we've been, and that's now looking where we're heading with this process. And again, this evening from the board, we're just looking for the authorization to send out the request for bid. And again, to be clear, this does not commit Norristown to actually executing or signing an agreement to sell. This is, again, just sort of moving the exploration process forward, and the board has the right at any point in time to stop the process. Any questions from the board or the audience?
Sir, so during this meeting, you don't have the opportunity to accept questions from the constituents. Council, any question? Councilman Jones.
I just wanted to reiterate that this isn't, in fact, a decision that we're making to sell the authority, but we're putting out a request for bid. So, I just wanted for the public and for people to know that we're not making a decision tonight.
Correct.
However, you explained that we're working towards a process of seeing who's interested, correct?
That's correct.
Any other questions from council? Seeing none, excuse me, would a member of council like to make a motion to authorize the potential authority sale and a request for council to authorize issuance of a request for bids? Madam Secretary, may I please have roll call?
Olivia Brady. Valerie Scott Cooper. Hakeem Jones. Derek Perry. Rebecca Smith. Heather Lewis. Sonia Sanders.
Aye, the ayes have it. That motion is approved and passed. Next order of business we have is the finance. Mr. Butts?
Thank you, Madam President, members of council. This item on the agenda, with this item on the agenda, we are requesting authorization to advertise proposed ordinance 19-14. This proposed ordinance, when fully enacted, will adopt the 2020 budget and set the real estate tax rate for 2020. Your action this evening will constitute the introduction and the first consideration of the ordinance as required by the Home Rule Charter. With the ordinance, there's an attachment which has all the funds and departments, appropriations for all funds and departments. Also, with your information in your packet is a copy of the presentation that was given to council on October 30th. In addition, there's a copy of the proposed capital improvements plan and a copy of the consolidated fee schedule for 2020. Section 1 of the ordinance 1914 appropriates from available revenue and other sources a total of $43,792,076 by department and fund as follows. From the general fund, And of course, the general fund is the primary operating fund of the municipality. It's about 85% of the total budget of $43.8 million. The general fund portion of that is $34,455,042. From the Highway Aid Fund, also known as the Liquid Fuels Fund, $1,385,170. From the Capital Projects Fund, which is the first year of the 5-year capital improvements plan, $5,984,550. From the Community Development Block Grant Funds, this includes not only the current CDBG fund, but any leftover funds from previous years that would be appropriated and available for spending in 2020. $1,090,736, and from an assortment of grant funds, $876,578. All personnel costs are budgeted in the general fund. The general fund contemplates salary and benefits for 163 full-time equivalent employees and 36 part-time and temporary employees. Salary increases are budgeted at 2.5% unless a collective bargaining agreement requires otherwise. Personnel costs, including salaries and benefits, are budgeted at $22.8 million, and it's 64% of the general fund budget is personnel costs. Of the benefit portion of the personnel cost, health benefits are nearly $4 million and are 12% of the budget, followed closely by retirement costs at $3.7 million, which is 11% of the general fund budget. Public safety costs, police and fire total just over $20 million of the general fund budget and consume 58.5% of the general fund budget. On the revenue side, real estate taxes constitute 39% of all general fund revenue at $13.7 million, followed by Act 511 taxes such as the earned income tax, the real estate property transfer tax, the LST tax, and some assortment other taxes on business and so on that constitute 34% of the budget in total, or $11.7 million. Assuming your approval to advertise the proposed ordinance, the real estate tax rate will be advertised at 15.7 mils. This is a 1 mil increase over the current rate of 14.7 mils. When you adopt the 2020 budget and tax rate ordinance in 2 weeks on December 17th, you will not be able to exceed the 15.7 mil tax rate, but you could adopt a lower rate. And at this time, we are hopeful, and I emphasize hopeful, that we can recommend a slightly lower tax rate. That's all I have with respect to the budget and tax ordinance 19-14.
I would just also add, Council, that with your authorization tonight, and we will certainly, we're going to put this, post this in the newspaper, put it on the website, put it in all our media for public consumption. And then certainly in terms of some of the supporting documentation you got around capital items and fees, we'll certainly, if you want to share any comments, discussions, additions that you have with Mr. Butts and or me, we'll be happy to take that, give you feedback so that as you get closer to adoption night, we have incorporated the things that are important to you as a council and at least bring them up for discussion so that you can make those determinations of any changes in both the rate, millage rate, and any particularly capital items or other items that you deem necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Council, any questions? Councilwoman Smith?
What hypothetical or less hypothetical changes could the recommendations proposed by Davenport and Company mean for our 2020 budget next year?
Well, I think that certainly the most significant recommendation would be to restructure our current debt. There's significant savings there. Some of those savings are actually programmed into the ordinance 19-14. Not assuming what council would do, but if you adopt the recommendation to restructure the debt, that's in the budget. If you decide that you don't want to restructure the debt, then we'd have to come back to you with a recommendation to fill the gap, if you will, by using additional fund balance.
Thank you. That was really the question, and the words weren't there, was if the proposed changes were in the proposed budget. So thank you.
Councilwoman Brady.
Yeah, the proposed budget presentation that's in our packet and that we've been using throughout the budget meetings, will that be on the website as well as the ordinance?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mike, I also wanted to add that we are going to advertise 2 public hearings, and typically what happens is staff conducts public hearings to take public input on the budget, and we share that information with council from all of that public input we get. So as you deliberate and discuss it, the budget, you can have that input we've received from those hearings.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Council, any other questions? Councilwoman Scott Cooper.
I guess I'm just a little bit concerned about the millage rate and the fact that the restructure is already incorporated in this budget. So it sounds as though, I don't like to use the words, we don't have too much of a choice, but because we can't go up, we kind of have to stay within that framework in order to keep that millage rate. Am I right?
Well, I think if you think back to the presentation we made on October 30th, and we pointed out at that time we had about a $2.8 million gap that we needed to close. So the way to close it going forward is either, and it could be, there are a number of things that council can do. You could amend this ordinance to allow for a higher potential tax rate. You could cut expenditures. You could go ahead with a restructuring of our debt, or you could close the gap by using additional unassigned fund balance. So there are options. My personal opinion is that the most attractive option is to restructure the debt. That would give us some breathing room going forward to put together at least a 5-year plan that would look at the operating budget over that period of time in conjunction with the capital improvement plan that's a 5-year plan. I think we need to start looking longer term. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, the options that you face are limited.
Because the fund balance, to me, is completely off the table. That's my opinion.
Well, I think we heard tonight from Davenport, and certainly that's my feeling, that we could not continue to use fund balance. We're going to use at least $1.4 million in fund balance in the current fiscal year in 2019. We're still working to close books on that. But to use $1.4 million in 2019 and turn around and have to use $2.8 million in 20 would be, I don't want to use the word disaster because that may be overstating it somewhat, but not by a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Butts. Council, any other questions?
Madam President, I do have one more.
Councilwoman Lewis.
And this is for you, Mr. Jones. You mentioned the public hearings. Can you tell me historically, especially since we're considering raising taxes and the gap widening with the balance of the budget, historically, how many residents have come out and made comments on the budget process during those hearings?
Thank you. I can tell you it's been a very low turnout. And when we advertised, I think it was a couple of years ago when we went from 12 to 14, 12.7 to 14.7 meals, which was a 2 meal increase, which is by far the largest increase that we've had to do. I think in both the initial reading, the 2 public hearings that we had, we actually maybe had a total of 8 people in all of those meetings that showed up, and I think we had actually no more than 2 comments on the budget in all of that time.
So, Mr. Jones, for the constituents who aren't aware of the past in terms of tax increases, could you just inform the constituents of the risk of not increasing taxes and where we are today, and how over the past 3 years, how council has not increased taxes and what it has done to the credit rating for the municipality?
Certainly. Thank you, Madam President. One of the things, I think it was mentioned by Davenport, one of the key rating items that rating agencies look at is what they call management. And that's not just the administrative staff management, but they actually look at council as managers of the government and certainly of the fiscal affairs of the government. A failure to appropriate the necessary funds to accommodate the expenditures you have and to rely on fund balance and other revenues, they look at that, rating agencies look at that as not good management on behalf of a board. And it does adversely impact what rating you get, which ultimately ends up being an adverse impact. Say if you do a borrowing, then you pay more to borrow money, which essentially is more taxes on residents at the end of the day. Council has been very, very conscientious of trying not to raise taxes, and essentially when that occurs, the longer you delay it, the more you have a high fiscal impact at the point you have to do it. As a matter of fact, when we had that 2 mil increase, there had been 3 years in a row, I think, when council didn't raise taxes. And one of the comments of the 2 comments that were 2 or 3 comments was that were made is, we understand that you have to raise taxes, but can't you do it gradually instead of do it all at one time? And so I think both in terms of not only financial advisors, but the exercise council we went through in terms of that whole year-long National Resource Network process. That was one of those things that, council's fiscal responsibility is making the tough decisions and essentially put that on the table for council's consideration. So failure to do that really in the long run ends up being more of a spot hits on residents than gradually smaller amounts as you deem necessary. And as Mr. Butts had mentioned earlier, we know and we understand that the direction that council has consistently given us is to find ways not to impact our residents adversely as much as possible during taxes for tax. And last year you made the decision because there were other tax increases in other bodies that and our fund balance was strong enough last year that you'd eat that out of fund balance. So again, that's $1.4 million in 2019, and the gap only grew not so much from any operational issues other than the cost of doing business, the cost of health care, the cost of pension funds, et cetera. And so that 1.4 doubled to 2.8, and so that's why you have to raise taxes, and the impact is adverse if you don't generate the revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Council, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, would a member of council like to make a motion to authorize the first reading of the 2020 budget ordinance establishing a millage rate of 15.7? Madam Secretary, may I please have roll call?
Olivia Brady, Valerie Scott Cooper, Hakeem Jones, Derek Perry, Rebecca Smith, Heather Lewis, Sonia Sanders.
Aye. The ayes have it. That motion is approved and passed. Before we go into adjournment, I'd like to thank all of the constituents for your patience and time as we dealt with the technical difficulties this evening. So, on behalf of council, we'd just like to thank you for bearing with us and knowing that once the renovations do begin, we will be able to have a better sense of technical, let's just say we'll close our technical gaps and we won't be going through this challenge. So needless to say, would a member of council like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting? All in favor? Meeting adjourned.